Today on The Future of Everything, the future of plant chemistry. Now, forgive me, but plants are fantastic living organisms. They do photosynthesis, which is pretty much a miracle. It's the ability to take the energy in photons of light from the sun, photons, and transform carbon dioxide, which is basically a waste product, into glucose. That can fuel all the processes of life. We humans can't do that. And so we rely on plants to take the energy of the sun and turn it into stuff basically that we can eat. And by the way, oxygen is a byproduct of the photosynthesis. So guess where we get lots of our oxygen from as well. So there you go. Right there, photosynthesis is a highlight of life on Earth. Plants are also, of course, a source of food for most of the food chain, not just humans. They also make very complex and interesting chemicals that are needed for their life processes. They're also needed for combating fungi that they might be waging battle with, and other organisms that are dangerous or a threat to them. They create shade, ground cover. Okay, you all know what plants are, so I don't want to belabor this, but plants are also stressed by the environment, by environmental conditions, just like other organisms are stressed by global warming, pollution, changes in rain patterns, and changes in nutrient availability within soil. So there is a vibrant research community looking at plants in two complementary ways. How can we help them be more robust, grow well in difficult conditions, and make more of the good stuff, oxygen, glucose, nutrients, drugs? And how can we understand their amazing ability to make powerful molecules that we can harness for cancer, antifungals, and other medical and industrial purposes? Dr. Elizabeth Sattely is a professor of chemical engineering at Stanford University who studies plant chemistry. She is particularly focused on manufacturing and engineering molecules from plants, enhancing plant fitness, and looking for new ways to use the chemicals in wood as food. Something that is not my first choice, but I'm open-minded. Now, Beth, some of your work has focused on helping crops grow in difficult soils. You had to engineer the plants to have some different capabilities from kind of what they had naturally, but the upside could be a much better food supply eventually in areas that are traditionally tough to farm. So my question is, what is the basis for this new capability for growing plants, and how does the technology look for scaling?
Yeah, so let me back up a second and
Sure.
just tell you a little bit about what I find really fascinating about plants. This is a whole kingdom of life, and there's all different chemistries that have evolved across the plant kingdom to deal with these different environmental stresses. So all the same things we have to deal with, plants have to deal with, and they do it exactly where they're planted. They don't have an option of moving or going somewhere else. Right? So what we really find fascinating is how different chemistries have evolved in plants to help them do this. How does a small molecule that a plant makes allow it to get vitamins out of the soil that we just get through our diet?
Right.
And so with the crops we grow, when you think about the whole plant kingdom, we only grow a very small number of plants. And those plants are not necessarily, they haven't evolved to deal with all the different types of environmental stresses that a plant might encounter. So what's really interesting to me is this idea that you might be able to take a mechanism that evolved in one corner of the plant kingdom and move it into a crop that we grow for food and enable it to grow in a more efficient way without as many fertilizer inputs and deal with environmental stresses better.
That makes a lot of sense, because not only do we only grow a subset of the plants, as you say, but my understanding is they've been highly evolved through husbandry and whatnot to, I don't know if it's husbandry but through farmer selection and to be particularly good at growing in particular situations. And as those situations change, they might be even less prepared than a normal plant to adapt to changing environments.
Exactly. So we've bred plants for certain traits, right? And as we start to care about different things, for example, environmental impact of the agriculture that we do, we might change what types of traits we want in the crops that we grow.
So tell me about this work that you did. It got some press recently. I think it was the first step in what could be a multi-step process for strengthening and making our plants more robust.
Right. So I was really, going back, I'm a chemist and I'm just really interested in the role of small molecules. How can organisms use small molecules to do the stuff they have to do?
Yes.
And plants are especially good at this. You pointed out at the beginning how, plants take CO2 and they build virtually all the building blocks for life as we know it. So, all the molecules in your body were born in a plant through photosynthesis, right? So I was really interested in this challenge plants have of the seed lands where it lands, the plant starts growing, and it needs to get all the nutrients it needs for life. Now, photosynthesis is super cool. You can take photons, CO2, and make things, but there's actually a lot more required to make a whole organism.
Right.
So one thing is iron, right? All these, and that's just one of many different micronutrients that all organisms need in order to carry out their life processes. So plants, just like us, require iron to drive enzyme catalysis to make all those different molecules. And so I was really interested to find that iron is actually the fourth most limiting nutrient for plant growth. Wherever the roots land, they're kind of like inside out intestines, you can think about it,
Yep.
right? They need to be able to get iron from the soil. And if there's not iron nearby or it's not very available, that's going to be a limitation for growth. And so what we've been able to find, we and others have learned that plants produce small molecules, they exude them or secrete them from their roots, and it helps them get iron that
Into the soil.
into the soil
Huh.
that might be distal from where they are. So again, we think about plants, they need to grow where they're planted, but they actually have a reach that's further than that.
So tell me about these secreted molecules. So did you actually give some of these secreted molecules to plant roots that didn't have them previously to kind of increase their ability to grab iron?
So really, at this point, we're just trying to figure out what kinds of things do plants do to deal with these types of
So we need to
environmental
understand what
stresses.
their arsenal of tools is.
Exactly. And, like I said, different tools have evolved across the plant kingdom. So one large set of plants have evolved this ability to discrete molecules that actually can grab iron, change its chemical state, and make it easier and more bioavailable to take up by the roots. And
So it's almost like pre-processing the iron to make it easier to absorb.
right.
And then all you have to do if you're the plant, so to speak, is grow a root towards where that molecule has helped prepare the iron, and there the iron is ready to go, whereas it wouldn't have been ready to go if you hadn't secreted that whatever it is.
Yeah. And if I talk about kind of where this project started for me and for my lab, what we've been really interested in is all the genome sequencing that's been done in plants. So if you sequence a new plant genome, what we quickly realize after we get all those A, Gs, Ts, and Cs lined up is that plants can make a huge amount of different small molecules. And so that, in my lab, that's just been fascinating for us. Why do plants make all these small molecules and what are we doing? So we kind of started from a standpoint of this interesting gene in a plant that we realized could make a small molecule and then asked what was it doing. And this, one after another led us to this small molecule that's important for acquiring iron.
So that is amazing because I'm sure you then look at these genomes, which are very complex, and it's a huge needle in a haystack type challenge to figure out, okay, here's a molecule, what the heck does it do? There's a lot of things going on in a plant. Can you make it, can you help us understand how do you narrow down the things in the genome that look promising for discovery in terms of nutrient exposure and growth under harsh condition adaptation?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. When you're doing discovery, the more tools you have, the easier it's going to be to identify things. Also, the more we know, the more we can start to predict. So we're starting to learn a lot more about the ability of plants to make molecules, and that allows us to say, oh, this gene is potentially interesting. We think it's making a chemical that's important for, a process in the plant. Furthermore, on the side of tools, we have what's called model plants, just like in every, different system, there's fruit flies or there's different cell lines that are important.
Right.
So we have sort of the fruit fly of the plant world, which is this model plant Arabidopsis. And there's a lot of tools available to be able to understand and study what are genes doing? What are the chemistries that's coming out of these
Tell
plants?
us a little bit about Arabidopsis. Is this something that a normal person would come across in a field somewhere, or what is Arabidopsis?
Yeah, it's I call it like a sidewalk weed. I mean,
Okay.
you can find it all over the world. There's different ecotypes. It's very robust. It has a short life cycle. That's pretty important.
So you can get your experiments done more quickly.
Yeah, it grows quickly, and it goes from seed to adult plant to seed again very fast. It has a fast life cycle.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, tell me what. So you said that these are small molecules in general that are secreted. And what is a small molecule to you as a chemist?
Yeah, sure. I was thinking a little bit about this morning. Proteins are awesome. We know about proteins. They do super cool things. They're big molecules, right? For me, a small molecule, I started out as an organic chemist, so it's something I can draw all the bonds, I can understand the shape. Maybe it has 30 atoms or so.
Okay.
It's on the order of 3 nanometers in size.
Okay.
It's tiny.
So
like a drug, like a
drugs that we
pharmaceutical.
take and vitamins, all when you look at the molecular structure, they're around the size. So one of the things that I know about plants, and it's not much, is that they have amazing synthetic chemical abilities, that they have abilities to make molecules that are even challenging for distinguished chemists to make. And you've looked at that, and in some cases you're trying to kind of copy the ability of to match what a plant can do, or to almost have a human-plant collaboration in making these small molecules. Can you tell us about what's special about the synthetic capabilities of plants, and where can we take advantage of this for industrial and medical purposes?
Yeah, sure. So let me start with the first part. What's kind of special about plants? Plants, the chemistry of plants has evolved in a very creative way. Plants, pick off the kinds of molecules that are present in every living organism, like amino acids, and can stick them together in all kinds of interesting ways to make small molecules that have a completely new function. Right? So either they're acquiring iron from the soil, or they're signaling to another cell, which initiates a whole new biological process. In plants, small molecules control immunity. So, we have cells, right, circulating cells as part of our immune system. Plants have small molecules that signal to distal parts of the plant.
Is it fair to say that the small molecule repertoire in plants is greater than the small molecule repertoire in like mammals, or are they just different, or do they have more capabilities?
I would say for sure plants lean on their chemistry a lot more.
Okay.
Right?
Because they can't move, they can't do all the things that we do to augment our own ability to basically gather energy, so they have to do it in other ways.
Yep. That's a way they signal within the organism themselves, signal from one plant to another, a way they communicate cross kingdom with insects, with pathogens, with humans that might be eating plants. Those are all messages in a chemical form.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Dr. Elizabeth Sattely about plants and their wonderful capabilities for chemistry. So what about the medicinal or industrial opportunities? I know there are already some. I know there are some famous chemotherapies that are essentially from plants. How do we discover those, and is there an opportunity to copy what the plants do to be more efficient in our own human synthetic abilities?
Yeah, so we certainly care about plants because it's the food we eat, but we also get a lot of many molecules that are important for human health come from plants, right? Aspirin is derived from a plant molecule.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right? All the way to, as you said, chemotherapeutics that are molecules we've isolated from plants, and then we actually use them in the clinic. So there's sort of the classical use of molecules from plants as drugs in the clinic, and that's one major way that plants influence our health, right?
Do we actually still get those kinds of drugs? Like for aspirin, I don't believe we get it from plants anymore. We synthesize it, but I know that there are some chemicals that are too complex, if I'm remembering correctly, that we actually don't even know how to make them in the lab, so we have to have the plant as like part of the process.
Yeah. So sometime back, there's this list, World Health Organization, essential medicines. And if you take a look at that list and ask where do all those different medicines come from, we estimated it was about 10% are molecules that come from plants. So, they either are exactly the structure that came from plants or really, really similar. And when you look closely at those cases, the majority are still produced in plants that are grown in the field. So the molecule in the clinic started its life in a plant grown in a field, or another major way is plant cell culture. So as humans, although we might have the ability to synthesize these from scratch using synthetic chemistry, that's not necessarily the most efficient way yet to produce them.
And so when you say in culture, it's almost like a Petri dish instead of a Petri dish with plant cells growing in it, not as a plant, but just as a layer of plant cells.
Exactly.
And then you can harvest whatever chemicals you need from that. Now, before we end this segment, I got to ask, you said that iron was the fourth limiting nutrient.
Yep.
Do you, off the top of your head, do you know what the other three are that are?
Yeah, sure.
Because these would be good targets too, I would guess.
Yeah, they're very good targets. All you have to do is go to the hardware store and get some fertilizer. So it's nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are the first three most limiting nutrients.
Any farmer would know this.
Right.
Because they're adding it constantly to their dirt.
Right. So nitrogen is another huge input required for plant growth.
And these, I would gather that these also show a huge variability in their abundance across different types of soil, and so therefore their the utility of a piece of dirt, soil, for growth of a plant might be very dependent on the level of these four nutrients.
Exactly. But even though you see large differences in the levels of these different nutrients, plants can grow anywhere. And that's because different plants have evolved different strategies. Some plants, make a home for bacteria that enable them to grab nitrogen out of the air, and that becomes part of their biomass. Other plants can't do that, right? So all these cool mechanisms are out there. It's just the question is, what are they and how can we harness them?
So now I can link what you just said to the fact that you're looking at the genomes of these plants and you're trying to identify unappreciated molecules that might be involved now, not only in iron, but if you can figure out that there are these parts of the genome that are useful for potassium or nitrogen, that might then expand your research program to look into how are those taken up. Are those all three taken up from soil? Nitrogen might be from the air. So maybe you can give us a quick summary. Are all three of those, the new ones that are not iron, taken up from the soil?
Yes, they're all taken up from the soil. Everything except, gases like oxygen and CO2 and water are exchanged through the plant leaf. Everything else has to come in through those roots.
And do you have active programs in all four of those, or is iron the main focus now?
We don't. Getting nutrients, think about ourselves. Getting our nutrients is only one of the challenges we face every day. So, we're interested in how plants acquire nutrients from the soil. We have a project where we're working on how bacteria can transfer nitrogen to plant roots. But there's a lot of other challenges of interest to us. Pathogen challenge is another big stressor on plants. How do they combat all of the organisms that they're essentially bathed in as they're growing?
This is The Future of Everything. We'll have more with Dr. Elizabeth Sattely in a moment on The Future of Everything here on Sirius XM. Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Dr. Beth Sattely about plants, the small molecules they make, and their impact on their own environment and on our environment. So one of the things I wanted to get to is you described very well how plants are these little factories that are making these small molecules in many ways much more abundantly and with much greater capability than what kind of we as human living organisms can do. But one of the things is we eat these plants, which means we're eating these small molecules. Do we know what the impact or importance of these small molecules in plants that might be uncharacterized are for our health and welfare?
Right. I think we're really starting to scratch the surface and being able to do a good job quantifying what is the role of these small molecules. Much of what we know comes from very large epidemiology studies with people eat certain foods and have certain disease or health outcomes.
Yes.
But now it's really time to look much closer, I think, into the molecular contents of that food that we're eating and have a better understanding of all of these chemicals, this molecular diet that you consume. How does this influence our health?
So is there an example of foods that we eat that have chemicals with known impact on health?
Yeah, one of the most well-studied examples comes from the Brassica family of plants. So this is broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, foods you either really enjoy or really despise.
Yes.
You might really despise them because of the special small molecules that are made in those food that have a very pungent flavor.
So the obvious thing, of course, is that the taste of many of our vegetable plants is going to be related to the small molecules they contain.
Absolutely.
And so cabbage, to the extent that cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower might have a shared not only texture but taste, it might be because of a shared set of small molecules.
Right.
And we actually know something about the significance of those molecules?
Yeah, people have been able to isolate the small molecule and do studies with it. And there's data that suggests that, consumption of a lot of these vegetables can lead to reduced incidence, for example, in certain cancers. But I think that we're really poised to be able to go in and ask, in the context of the food, when the molecule's either there or it's absent, what is the impact on human health?
Yes, and I would imagine that in addition to taste, and this is amazing that there may be some substances that reduce cancer risk in vegetables, because this would just get everybody out there eating more broccoli. I would guess it might have impact on immunity, because the immune system is something we don't fully understand, and I wouldn't be surprised if these small molecules are interacting with the immune system. And also, I wonder if these small molecules might have interactions with the bacteria. We've been hearing a lot about the microbiome and the bacteria that live in our gut. Do we know if these small molecules are of interest or are getting the attention of these bacteria that live in our intestines?
Yeah, they certainly are getting the attention. I think what we've seen in our lab is that gut microbes are able to consume almost anything you put at them, including the small molecules, and they'll sometimes convert them to different forms that changes the activity of those small molecules. And so we're really just beginning to scratch the surface to understand at this chemical level, what are the reactions that take place in the gut? How do they influence bacteria? And then in turn, how do they influence the human host?
Really interesting. So, that issue that would then come up would be the dosage. So you said that these studies had been done, for example, on broccoli, and it has some small molecules that might impact cancer. So scientists who are studying this, are they considering the dosage effects? Because sometimes you might find out, well, broccoli is good and it has a compound that helps you with cancer, but you need to eat, 40 pounds of broccoli a day. So I'm sure that there's a basic question of the quantities of these small molecules and their ability to have biological effects at the dosages, and I'm using scare quotes because the dose, we don't think of it as a dose, but at the end of the day, if you eat 5 cauliflower stalks, that's going to be a certain dose of a small molecule. Are we getting down to the level of thinking about dosage and what the impact is on individuals?
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's not a black, like anything, it's not black and white with these small molecules. It's likely that they're good in certain contexts and at certain levels, but too much of anything is never a good thing, right? Yeah. So you wouldn't want to just go and eat one food in its entirety. The other thing, too, is that a lot of these small molecules, the way they've been studied in the past is to take them outside of the food context, turn them into more sort of drugs like the kind you would use in the clinic.
And much more pure.
And study them there. And we think that there's likely a lot of different impacts from the food matrix and how that small molecule and compound is delivered and essentially interfaces with the human digestive system. That's important.
So studying it in a pure form may be misleading because it actually is eaten with a whole bunch of other molecules, and that they, as an ensemble, they may have their effects as opposed to individual molecules.
Right, yeah.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Dr. Beth Sattely about plants. And we were talking about plants and their small molecules, but there's another factor here I just want to ask you about, which is we often cook our plants. Mm-hmm. So I remember from chemistry lab and biochemistry lab that when you heat up molecules, reactions happen. So I guess there's a second layer of complexity here, which is there's the stuff in the broccoli before it's cooked, and then it might actually be a little different after it's cooked. Is this of interest, and are there people thinking about what these effects might be?
Yeah, I think that, historically, food chemistry has been kept, in a kind of different sphere than us chemists, right? Huh. There's a lot of reactions taking place when you cook food, when you mix different foods together. And, now we're really starting to understand the molecular processes that are taking place there. But I think that there's a lot of information to be gleaned about, traditional practices, certain foods that are eaten together. What is the actual molecular outcome of doing that, and what are the reactions that take place? Why does that occur, and why is that helpful?
Yeah, so I do watch the Food Network, and some of the best chefs are always talking about, they don't use the language of chemistry in general.
Right.
There are some that seem to be trying, but but they're very smart, and of course they have a lot of pressure on themselves from the market to do a good job. And there seems to be emerging in the cooking industry some like general rules about what goes together well. And what I'm hearing you say is that there actually might be scientific principles there that can be harnessed to say, a yummy food might be yummy because these kinds of reactions have happened, and that tickles the human palate, and therefore it's a good. Is this something that I mean? Are you a cook?
I try to be, yeah.
And do you find that this is a separate world, or does the chemist in you start thinking about how you're cooking?
Yeah, it's always fun when your science life starts to
Right, exactly.
interface with your real life, either in the garden or at the stove.
Yes. So you do have a garden.
I do, yeah.
So this is actually fun because it brings together your whole professional and personal life. Do you have a cooking specialty? Here's a direction you weren't expecting us to go.
No, but I do like, enhancing the palate with herbs and spices, things that you grow in your garden. And, those are bags of chemicals. Those are drug-like molecules in each and every one of those plants.
So getting back to this a little bit more scientifically, as you know, one of my interests is drugs and the impact of drugs on human health. And I can't help but wonder if the small molecules in the food I eat might be impacting how the drugs that I take, the medications that I take, are metabolized or how effective they are. Do we know about the ability of the small molecules in our plant food to kind of compete with, augment, or hinder the effects of our drugs?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most famous examples is grapefruit. There's a small molecule in grapefruit that, competes with metabolic processes that would otherwise, remove a certain pharmaceutical from your body. So, that's just one example, but there's got to be lots more out there, because when we take a close look at your salad, what we see is that there's a huge number of different chemicals in there. So I think a lot of what's happening is currently underappreciated in terms of, food metabolism and chemistry.
Yes, and I of course I do know about that grapefruit juice prohibition for certain drugs, and I agree with you that if it's that big of a deal for grapefruit, the chances that there aren't lots of other examples of this, and so it's a hugely important area for human health going forward. Well, thank you for listening to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. If you missed any of this episode, listen anytime on demand with the SiriusXM app.